I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage. But the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No, no room for hate. No room for hate. You can wave a flag above it, you can quote a verse or two, you can dress it up like justice till it almost sounds like truth. But our rage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start where the anger breaks.
Where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up where the hurt gives way.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
Not in Jesus' name. Oh, not in this house. Not in this heart. Not in His name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight, entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST, the future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name is Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
In uncertain times, we could use someone to lean on. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma will stand by you with plan options to fit your budget. If you've recently lost your job, had a baby, or moved, you can still get the healthcare coverage you and your family need. Financial help may be available for those who qualify. Call 855-452-BLUE or visit hereforyouok.com to see if you're eligible to enroll. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma, a division of Healthcare Service Corporation, a mutual legal reserve company.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Got a vendetta. Coffee tastes like bad decisions I ain't made yet. Boss man talking about we got her, and that means me, brother. Afraid I got a terminal case of the I don't want us. Mind checked out, heart ain't in the building. That second hand's crawling like it hates my guts. The man treating rich like it's a sin. Even God took a beat. So, suck it. Thank God it's Friday, punching out loud. Hands in the air, middle finger to 9 to 5. Still waiting, but tonight I don't care. Cold beer sermon and a bar stool prayer. Take this job and shove it, I quit. Till Monday. Cause tonight I'm free. Yeah, working way. It ain't owning me. So raise a them up high,
Raise 'em up high.
let the whistle blow.
Let the whistle blow.
Thank God it's Friday, that's all I know. HR in the break room sounding like a preacher, talking about culture smiles and being team players. Clipboard dreams on the fluorescent light, selling hours of my life just to make it to Friday night. Got dirt on my jeans, and grease on my hands, clock more over than quality plans. But when that bell rings, it's a holy sound. Feel like chains hit the floor when it echoes around. I ain't lazy, I just work my fill. If rest is a sin, guess I always will. Thank God it's Friday, punching out alive. Hands in the air, middle finger to 9 to 5. Bill's still waiting, but tonight don't care. Cold beer sermon and a bar stool prayer. Take this job and shove it, I quit. Till Monday, cause tonight I'm free. Yeah, work and wait, it ain't on to me. So raise them up high, let the whistle blow. Thank God it's Friday. Raise that flag, that's all I know. Brown never wave that right. News with a backbone, voice of the free. Rick's got the pulse of liberty. It's a Rick Robinson showboat, unafraid. Truth bombs drop in a red state parade, from the plains to the power east.
And good Friday afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, it's lunch hour here if you are in God's time zone, which is the only one I really care about. However, it's a little bit past your lunchtime if you happen to be living in the future time zone we call the East Coast around here. And also, for those of you living in the past, it's only about 10 something where you are. Most of you are probably still asleep anyway. Anyway, welcome into the program. This is the Finally Friday edition of the Rick Robinson Show. We'll be rolling straight into the weekend news roundup afterwards, so make sure you guys hang out for that. There will be no he said, she said tonight. Aggie requested time off for some family stuff. And I have decided I work too damn much, so I'm taking Friday night off. Well, that I'm going to try to get caught up on some writing. So I'm not really taking it completely off. I'm just shifting focus to something else for the evening. Anyway, so we're here. We're live. It's Friday. So far for the panel coming up after this one, I have confirmed BZ from BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon, SHR Media Network, and KLRM Radio. Also, Amy Curtis, formerly of Twitchy, now with Town Hall, and a regular contributor to the Weekend News Roundup. So far, those two have confirmed. Brad, now that he's moved on to Mediaite, I think he thinks he's too good for us. No, I'm just kidding. He's still doing a lot of his shows, so I'm not really complaining, because for a while we weren't sure he was going to be able to do any of them anymore. And I think he's still waiting on confirmation that it won't step on anybody's toes if he does a news-flavored show still. So I guess we will see. And no, I will never delete my account. No, responding to Zelda in the chat. All right, so we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today, some of which is not necessarily good, by the way, because there's been some interesting kind of breaking stories over the last, few days. So this is one that I've been kind of working on and fleshing out over the week while I was testing a bunch of other stuff out with some of my new equipment. So we're going to go ahead and get started, though, because otherwise I probably won't get all the way through this. As usual, I probably have too many damn notes. So there was a time when the phrase national security conjured up a fairly specific set of images, things like military bases, aircraft carriers, nuclear launch codes, including the nuclear football that first we were terrified that Joe Biden had the codes, and now they're terrified that Trump has the codes. So at least one thing is consistent. Nobody wants either side to have the codes. So also including things like intelligence agencies, border crossings, maybe satellites if you were feeling particularly adventurous. But increasingly, national security means something much less cinematic and much more ordinary. It means the transformer sitting outside of town. It means the control system that keeps electricity moving from one region to another. It means the software running inside industrial equipment. It means firmware. It also encompasses things like remote access. And apparently, it means asking a question we probably should have asked a lot earlier, but we seem to finally be asking now. And that question is, who actually built the equipment keeping all the lights on around here? Because on Wednesday, President Trump signed an executive order declaring a national emergency involving the foreign supply of equipment used in the American bulk power system. Not because the lights are about to go out tonight, unless, of course, you live in places like California, then you're probably subject to rolling blackouts right now. Not because somebody blew up a substation. The emergency is about the possibility that foreign produced equipment inside the grid creates vulnerabilities that could be exploited later. I'm going to take a moment just to be precise here, because whenever the words national emergency appear, everybody immediately races towards the most dramatic interpretation possible with their hair on fire, screaming the sky is falling. The administration is not saying America's power grid is collapsing. It is saying something arguably more interesting. America has become heavily reliant on foreign-made technology throughout an electrical system that has now become even more strategically important than it already was. And the White House is explicitly connecting that increased importance to advanced manufacturing, defense production, artificial intelligence, and data centers. Think about that for a second. We are simultaneously saying we need more AI, we need more data centers, we need to bring manufacturing back, we need more domestic defense production, we need vastly more electricity to make all of that happen. And somebody looks underneath the hood of the electrical system and says, how much exactly of all of this stuff making all of this possible and making it work did somebody else build? That's where today's conversation really starts, because this order did not appear out of nowhere. The White House specifically raises the possibility that foreign equipment could contain digital back doors. And yes, I said back doors.
Giggity, 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 let's have sex.
Oh, come on. You knew that was going to happen. You knew that was going to happen. And those backdoors permitting remote foreign access. The administration is directing the Energy Department to identify equipment connected to covered foreign entities that could create risks of sabotage, subversion, catastrophic infrastructure effects, or unacceptable national security exposure. Now, if that were simply an assertion in a White House press release, we'd put it in the pile with every other government warning and not really say very much until they started producing the receipts that we were screaming for. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending upon how much sleep you wanted tonight, we have some. Reuters reported last year that investigators examining Chinese manufactured solar power equipment had discovered undocumented communication components in some inverters and batteries. And we talked about that on this show at the time, which is why we're bringing it up again now. That matters because an inverter isn't merely some dumb hunk of metal. Modern electrical infrastructure is increasingly networked. Software talks to hardware. Hardware talks to operators. Operators can monitor equipment remotely. And once you've established that something can communicate remotely, the important security question isn't merely can we reach it, it's who else can reach it. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. When all these people that love all these interconnected home gadgets and their thermostats that can talk to their smartphones and their refrigerators that can put in orders for them when it realizes things have gotten empty. Look, I am as big of a technology nerd as the next guy, and I get it. That's why I've loosened some of my, I used to have really hard line stances on a lot of this stuff. But I realize now there's really no way to get away from it unless you're just going to completely move out in the woods and disconnect yourself from society altogether. Because right now, in my pocket, as I sit here talking to you, on a computer, connected to a webcam, connected to the internet, connected to two different services to make it happen and make it possible, I also have a device in my pocket that pretty much listens to every word that I say. But the question becomes, who else can get to all of this data? Who else can remote network into these things? And who else can do things to, say, put extra strain on the grid by cranking things up in certain times when there's already issues? These are things that we really should be thinking about. And this is one of the reasons why I kept trying to tell everybody the cheapest goods are not always the best common denominator. So, again, finding undocumented communications hardware is not the same thing as proving somebody installed a malicious Chinese government kill switch. But it's not necessarily disproving it either. They are two different claims. We have evidence of undisclosed capability we have evidence of a security concern. We do not get to leap from there to Xi Jinping has an app on his phone labeled Turn Off Oklahoma. Although it probably, anyway. That would be fun radio and might be akin to the War of the Worlds broadcast from the 30s, but still. It would also be irresponsible radio, much like the War of the World broadcast from the 30s. But the documented concern is serious enough without embellishment, because cybersecurity is built around knowing what is connected to what. You cannot secure a pathway you don't know exists. And if the equipment controlling pieces of your electrical infrastructure contains communication capability that the buyer wasn't expecting, that is not some minor warranty issue. That is a potential attack surface. And then Wednesday gave us another piece of the story. On the same day the president signed this order, the Justice Department announced that American authorities had disrupted another Chinese-linked hacking operation, according to DOJ, and reporting from Reuters, the operation had targeted or attempted to penetrate a remarkable list of American institutions. Places, that may sound familiar to you, like the Department of Justice, NASA, the Federal Reserve, Department of Energy Laboratories, health agencies, defense contractors, universities, financial institutions of all stripes, even attempted targets involving the United States Senate and hospitals. Authorities say the activity stretches back to at least 2018 and tied the infrastructure supporting the attacks to a Chinese technology company believed to work with Chinese intelligence and military services. And this is something that we need to make very clear right now. Every company based in China has some ties to the Chi-Com government and their spy networks. That's just the truth of it. China denies those allegations, of course, and says the United States politicizes cybersecurity, and fair enough, put the denial on the table, but here's the part that matters for our conversation. The security concern here is no longer theoretical. We aren't sitting around wondering whether foreign actors might someday decide American critical infrastructure is worth probing. U.S. officials say Chinese-linked actors have already gained access to parts of American critical infrastructure, which brings us back to a phrase we've heard before, Volt Typhoon. That Chinese-linked campaign was notable precisely because U.S. officials said that the apparent purpose wasn't ordinary espionage. The concern was that actors were positioning themselves inside American critical infrastructure so that during some future confrontation, they might be capable of causing disruption. Power, water, communications, transportation, the basic system that allows normal life to continue. And that's the distinction that matters. Spying wants your information. Prepositioning wants your options. If you're sitting inside somebody's network when a crisis begins, you don't necessarily have to attack today. You wait. You learn the system. You learn where the weak points are. You establish persistence. And then, if Taiwan blows up or some other geopolitical confrontation suddenly changes the relationship between Washington and Beijing, you're already standing inside the building looking for the breaker box. That's why the physical hardware issue and the cybersecurity issue cannot really be separated anymore. For years, we talked about cyber attacks as though they happened in some magical, invisible internet universe. Somebody hacks a computer, somebody steals emails, somebody takes a database. But increasingly, the computer being hacked is attached to something, a pipeline, a water pump, a manufacturing line, a hospital, or an electrical grid. And once software controls the physical world, cybersecurity becomes physical security. Now add one more ingredient. America is about to ask considerably more of this grid. The executive order itself says rapid growth in data centers, AI, advanced manufacturing, and defense production has increased America's dependence on abundant, reliable power and magnified the consequences of an attack or supply disruption. That sentence is the hinge for the rest of this hour, because we have three things happening at the same time. America wants to build more. America needs dramatically more electricity to build more. And America is discovering that parts of the infrastructure needed to supply that electricity may represent both a foreign supply chain dependency as well as a cybersecurity vulnerability. That's not an argument against building data centers. It's not an argument against AI. It's not even automatically an argument against importing equipment. It's an argument for finally understanding that economic policy, energy policy, technology policy, and national security policy have become the same conversation. For 30 years, we treated supply chains primarily as an economics problem. Who can make it cheapest? Who can deliver it fastest? Where can we shave another nickel off the component cost? And globalization worked wonderfully as long as you assumed the country making the component would always remain merely your vendor. But everybody knows what happens when you assume. What happens when your vendor is also your principal strategic competitor? What happens when you're depending on that competitor for pieces of the infrastructure supporting your military, your manufacturing base, your communication system, and the artificial intelligence industry everyone agrees is going to shape the next several decades? Suddenly, the cheapest component isn't necessarily the cheapest component anymore because price and cost aren't always the same thing. And that I think is the fundamental shift underneath this executive order. The administration is saying the supply chain itself is now part of the national security perimeter, and we've been coming to terms with that ever since COVID. Pardon me. There's only been a handful of times that this has been brought up in this context, but we started having this discussion over all kinds of things, like China being where most of our medicine comes from these days, where even if it's not where the medicine comes from, where a lot of the components to make the medicines come from. Everybody had a meltdown when they realized that the reason there was such a toilet paper shortage wasn't because of a lack of toilet paper. It was because of a lack of the little cardboard rolls that the toilet paper goes on. So there actually were some cheaper toilet paper brands that started sending them out without the rolls. Guess where the cardboard rolls come from? This is why supply chain has become important. Now, we're not just talking about the border anymore, not just the military base, not just the classified network. The supply chain, the transformer, the inverter, the firmware, the remote access channel, the things so boring that nobody paid attention to them until somebody realized turning one of them off could actually become a form of a weapon. And that takes us to the next piece of this story, because America isn't merely trying to secure the electrical infrastructure we already have. We're about to build enormous amounts of new infrastructure to feed the newly emerging AI economy. And somewhere along the way, Americans started getting very skeptical about those data centers. The interesting question here is not simply why, it's who noticed that skepticism and what they tried to do with it. So we're going to take the first break of the show. This, of course, is Friday, so we'll be doing our musical breaks. First up will likely be the military break because it's the longest one of the show, and that gets it out of the way. So we'll do that one here in a moment. But when we come back, we're going to keep following the trail that we've been laying out so far because the backlash against data centers is real. The concerns over power bills, water use, local infrastructure, and who benefits are also real. But there's now evidence that foreign actors noticed that argument too. And they may have actually been trying to make it louder. We'll get more into that on the other side of the break. My name is Rick Robinson. This is my show. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Before the oath was spoken out loud, before you stood apart from the crowd, there was a moment, quiet and clear, when you chose to stand while others stayed here. You raised your hand with a steady resolve, knowing some nights don't end when the mission's done. Not for glory, not for the pay, but for something worth more than walking away.
Only hold the line.
They carried the weight where the roads ran long, through dust and heat
When the days went on,
holding ground mile after mile, doing the
work that rarely drew a smile.
They stood their post when relief ran late, shoulders squared under the pull of fate.
Not chasing headlines, not asking why, just staying put when others pass by. We stand watching different ways,
stand watch over the deep. They kept their watch where the water turns black, miles from shore with no quick way back, measuring time by the rise and the fall, answering duty's unrelenting call. Through silent hours and endless seas, they stood their post in the cold night breeze, guarding the lanes the world depends on, so others slept and the light stayed on. We stand the watch in different ways, different nights, the same long days, one old spoken carried through, wherever duty calls us to. Simplify Marine, we go where we're sent. We go where we're sent. They moved as one when the moment came, side by side through fire and rain. First to step where the ground was thin, not for the odds but for the ones beside them. Trust was earned in the hard way through, every promise carried by the few. No turning back once the line was crossed. They stood shoulder to shoulder as brothers, never counting the cost. We stand the watch in different ways, different nights, the same long days, one old spoken carried through, wherever duty calls us to. Air Force, the sky is our domain. Air Force, the sky is our domain. They held their focus where seconds seem eternal, soaring between clouds and blue. Every movement measured and true, knowing what one clean moment could do. They watched the whole while guarding the small, every mission tied to a larger call. Calm under pressure, steady and clear, keeping the promise from far overhead. Space Force, we guard the dark without they faith. keep their vigil Where silence reigns, beyond the weather, beyond the rain, watching the paths that the world relies on, long before the warning lights come on.
Cloud, no banners, no clear view,
Just constant care in a canvas full of stars,
standing the watch through the endless night,
guarding the systems that keep us in light. While the watch is kept and the lines hold fast, there are lives still moving on the other side of that.
empty chairs and quiet phones, long goodbyes that don't feel done.
Names we carry but never say, folded flags and debts we pay. Every service, every scar reaches farther than the uniform ever could.
Coast Guard, we come when it matters most.
They launch into storms when hope feels thin, turning back isn't an option then. Hands reach out where the waters rise, pulling lives back from the edge of time. No headlines waiting when the call is done, just breathing restored and another life won. Every rescue, every return, a quiet promise kept in the worst conditions. We stand the watch in different ways, different nights, the same long days, one old spoken carried through, wherever duty calls us to. For the ones who raise the We promise to remember those who serve, those who stand watch still, and those who never came home.
And welcome back into Hour 1, Part 2 of the Rick Robinson Show. It's finally Friday. Finally Friday. And I realized this camera angle, this new camera setup doesn't work very well with this shortened scene. So let me fix that. Okay, so this should work a little better. All right, so hope everybody's having a great Friday. I know it's finally Friday. For those of you working for the weekend, you're nearly there. Gonna say this again, though. If you dread Monday and only look forward to Friday, you probably need to see about maybe finding a different gig. Just saying. Just saying. You know what they say? Find something to do that you love, and you'll feel like you've never worked a day in your life. I have to say, for about the last, I've been doing this now full-time for about 3 years. I have loved every second of it, even if there are days when I'm stressed like a mofo. Anyway, so we're back. We're live, and it is Friday. So let's get back into what we were talking about. So welcome back into the program. Before the break, we followed the hardware and the cyber side of this story. Now we need to look at the political fight surrounding the build-out, because Americans did not need China to invent reasons to be skeptical of data centers. And that distinction matters. Whenever somebody discovers foreign actors pushing an argument online, there's a temptation to suddenly treat everybody who already held that opinion like they're part of the operation. Not necessarily, because that's a bit of a lazy way to look at it, but I will say it's very interesting that the sea change happened around the same time that we started uncovering all of these different operations that are all tying back to China. The complaints sounding against data centers did not begin in Beijing. They began in communities where people looked at proposed projects and asked some pretty normal questions. But the question is, what was fueling those questions? So how much electricity is this thing going to use? How much water? Where are we putting it? How many permanent jobs does it actually create after construction ends? What happens to my utility bill? Are taxpayers going to be subsidizing this? Are we upgrading transmission lines for them? And if we are, who gets the bill? Those are, in fact, legitimate questions. AP reported this week that opposition to data center development has become genuinely bipartisan. You've got conservative farmers worried about the agricultural land, environmental groups worried about water and emissions, homeowners worried about noise, ratepayers worried about their electrical prices, and local governments looking at enormous projects and asking whether the promised economic development payoff actually outweighs the overall infrastructure costs. This is one of those strange political issues where somebody wearing a MAGA hat and somebody carrying an environmental protest sign can show up at the same county meeting for completely different reasons and still vote no on the same project. And the electricity question isn't imaginary either. Reuters reported that congestion costs on PJM, the largest power grid in the country, have surged dramatically this year. Transmission constraints alone have added billions of dollars in costs. Data centers aren't the only reason, though, because weather matters. Natural gas prices matter. Transmission bottlenecks matter too. Electrification matters, but growing data center demand is unquestionably going to be and is already adding pressure to the system. So before we go any further, put a giant red circle around this. The underlying argument here is real. You can believe America needs to win the AI race and still ask who should pay for the infrastructure. You can support data centers and still expect utilities to protect existing customers. You can want the jobs and still ask about the water. You can believe artificial intelligence is strategically essential and still tell some trillion-dollar technology company, congratulations on your exciting new server farm. Buy your own extension cord. Those positions are not, in fact, contradictory. And apparently somebody in China figured that out too. Back in June, OpenAI disclosed something it called the Data Center Bandwagon Campaign. The company says it identified and banned a cluster of ChatGPT accounts that likely originated in China. Those accounts were being used to generate English language social media material aimed primarily at American audiences. And the operators weren't presenting themselves as, hello, fellow Americans. This message brought to you by the People's Republic of China. They were posing as Americans, different backgrounds, different personas, different voices. And the narrative they were trying to amplify sounded remarkably familiar. Data centers increase electricity demand. Ordinary families pay the price. Big technology companies get richer. You get the power bill. OpenAI says the operators even asked the system to help create cartoons and other imagery built around those themes. But this went beyond somebody asking AI to write a few posts. OpenAI says the operators also used the system to help construct the operation itself, how to build believable personas, how to make accounts look authentic, how to mix lifestyle posts with political content, how to use interactions between accounts to create the appearance of organic engagement, how to maintain backups, how to reduce the odds of being caught as coordinated behavior. In other words, they weren't really asking, write me a mean tweet about a data center. They were asking something closer to this. How do I make you think the person writing this is your neighbor? That is a completely different game entirely. OpenAI says the operators were likely associated with a private Chinese technology company doing work for provincial level government clients. Notice the wording. OpenAI did not say, we have proven Xi Jinping personally ordered this operation. It said likely PRC origin with indications tying the activity to a commercial operation serving government clients. That's what the evidence supports. We don't need to improve upon that because the strategic intent is interesting enough. OpenAI says it found no evidence that this particular campaign meaningfully changed American public opinion. That matters. However, again, these campaigns started being discovered mid-2026. This was around the time that the sea change really began happening with Americans and data centers. And the reason I find this interesting is data centers are not anything that is new. Data centers have been around for a long time. And for all the people complaining about how we don't need more of them, we don't need this, we don't want that. Okay, that sounds really great. Except if we're not leading in the forefront of AI and data center technology, guess who is going to be? China. Do we really want to be beholden to China again? Look what happened during COVID. We were beholden to China for a lot of things during COVID, and we swore to ourselves never again because it put us in a position where we were having to go hand in hand to one of our biggest adversaries that's still left on the planet. And we kept telling ourselves, never again. But now the price tag is starting to come due on never again. And some of you are like, well, maybe just this one more time because it makes my life simpler and it makes things more affordable. You know, this is where I break with even everything that I put in my notes. Because I'm going to say this again. There was a time when Americans didn't consider the cost. They looked at the future and said, we have to do this because it's going to make the future better. I don't know when we started looking at anything and everything about our economy being the cost. Well, I take that back because I do know the answer to that question. And I know when it became so important. It was in the 70s when we started decoupling from, actual rare stuff tied to our monies, like detaching from the gold standard, things like that, creating magic money printers, deciding we were going to become the world's money changers. As a Christian nation, we should have understood what would likely happen eventually to the world's money changers. You need to look no further than Jesus flipping tables in the temple. But we did it anyway. And that's when everything became about price, because we weren't a nation that was creating anything really anymore for the most part. We were a nation of consumers. We have a consumer-driven economy now. We've had that for a long time. So that's why price is now the end-all and be-all of everything, to the detriment of all of us, because now, instead of having honest conversations about, well, maybe we don't necessarily need to gobble up all the farmland to make data centers when there's other ways that we can do it. This is what used to drive innovation, not just shut the conversation down entirely. We have gotten to the point where we don't innovate anything anymore. Look at the left with their constant push for the electrification of everything. They're still using and pushing and reliant upon technology that has existed since 1960. Ladies and gentlemen, as the kids say, that's the late 20th century. It's probably time for us to start looking at 21st century alternatives for these things, because I'm not saying a lot of them don't make sense, and I've actually made counterpoints for a lot of them. So why don't we start discussing putting data centers in places where they don't necessarily need large amounts of water because they're surrounded by water? The idea of putting data centers in space sounds great on paper right now and could eventually be a very viable thing, but not right now. But there are already people and places and countries that are starting to build their data centers underwater, or at least the things that drive their data centers underwater. So, just saying. So, this operation that we were talking about earlier demonstrates something much narrower than the overall concern of how much did China influence the sudden American sentiment against data centers. PRC linked actors were watching the American debate over AI infrastructure and trying to exploit concerns that were already there. And that phrase, already there, is the whole story, because successful influence operations don't need to invent some completely alien grievance. They find that crack that already exists and then they push on it. If Americans are angry about immigration, amplify immigration. If Americans are angry about race, amplify that. If Americans are angry about war, then you start pushing every button you can find about war. If Americans are angry about electricity prices and giant technology companies building enormous data centers in their communities, well, now you've got another lever. And then this morning, we got another piece. X says its safety team investigated suspected Chinese inauthentic activity and identified a bot farm of roughly 200,000 accounts. Now, let's fix the headline a bit before anybody gets carried away. Because while there was, in fact, a potential bot farm up to and including roughly 200,000 accounts, not all of those were pushing for the Chinese data center or the Chinese data center issues. So that doesn't mean 200,000 Chinese accounts were all posting data centers bad. Stupid American data center bad. Within that much larger network, X says it identified a smaller group of roughly 200 accounts pushing messages that could manipulate the legitimate American debate over AI and energy policy. Those posts included claims that data centers were driving up household electricity prices and straining the grid simultaneously. Others reportedly used AI-generated cartoons portraying data center operators enriching themselves at everybody else's expense. And now we've got something worth paying attention to. 2 months ago, OpenAI finds a likely China origin operation working this exact fault line. Now, X says it has found suspected Chinese inauthentic accounts pushing substantially the same subject. Does that prove they're the same organization? No. As a matter of fact, it's probably a little more scary if they're not. Does it prove the Chinese government directly commanded every account? Probably not, at least not directly. But you have to remember, every Chinese company is connected to the Chinese government. Does it prove Americans would all love data centers if only those dastardly bots had stayed home? Probably not. Somebody proposing a 200 megawatt facility next to your property is perfectly capable of making you mad without international assistance. But two separate platform discoveries establish something much narrow and much more defensible. China-linked operators regarded America's argument over AI infrastructure as useful terrain. And that should tell us something. Countries don't generally spend resources trying to manipulate debates they consider strategically irrelevant. AI infrastructure matters. Energy infrastructure matters. Data center capacity matters. And Beijing understands that the competition between the United States and China isn't simply about who develops the best model. It's about who can build the ecosystem underneath it, including all the bells and whistles and bits and pieces we don't talk about very often in the same sentence. Things like chips, power, data centers, transmission, manufacturing, capital involved in those things, talent to program the things, and public permission to keep building all of it. That last one matters. You can have the technology, you can have the money, you can even have the land. But if every community decides not here, eventually the strategic problem isn't technological anymore, it's political. And here's the other problem. While we have the right to tell our government we don't want these things here, Chinese don't have that right. So, and look, again, I get it, but you also need to understand, I'm looking at this in the vein of the 1960s. We all put our shoulder to the same rock and got men to the moon in the 60s, even though we could barely afford to be able to do it. But we did it anyway. This is the same kind of thing, because again, you don't want China leading this fight. It's just the truth of it. You don't want China leading this fight. I know that we try to live in this whole kumbaya, everybody hug each other and hug a tree and form your little sit-in crisscross applesauce style, and everybody's all just going to get along and sing kumbaya. Yeah, that's not a thing. It's really not. But it goes a step further, because if you're an American principal strategic competitor, why wouldn't you prefer that Americans spend the next 5 years screaming at each other about whether to build the infrastructure America says it needs to compete with you? And if we're fighting over it for 5 years and China isn't, where are they going to be in 5 years while we're still fighting over whether we should do the damn thing in the first place? Again, that does not invalidate the concerns. That is precisely why this operation works. Foreign propaganda is most effective when the person repeating it can truthfully say, but this part is true. Maybe the electricity prices really do go up. Maybe the transmission project really does cross somebody's farm. Maybe the water concern really is legitimate. Maybe a developer really did negotiate a sweetheart tax package. The propagandist doesn't have to invent those facts. The propagandist can select them, amplify them, make sure to strip away the context so they fit in pretty much every scenario, and then manufacture the appearance that everybody agrees. And maybe move somebody from, I have concerns about how this project is being handled, to nobody should build these anywhere. That is a much more sophisticated form of influence than simply telling a lie. And it creates a problem for us because democracy still has to function. We cannot respond to foreign influence by saying anybody criticizing a data center is helping China. Yeah. If citizens have legitimate concerns, government and developers have an obligation to answer them. In fact, dismissing real grievances as foreign propaganda may be one of the fastest ways to make the propaganda more effective, because now you've added "they're not listening to you" to the grievance list. The answer is transparency. What does the project consume? What does it generate economically? Who pays for the new power? Who pays for new transmission? What's the power? What's the water plan? What happens during peak demand? What tax incentives were offered? What happens to residential rates? Put those answers on the table, because if you don't fill an information vacuum with facts, somebody else will happily fill it with a meme. And that's where this entire hour fits together. Because at the beginning, we were talking about Chinese manufactured hardware inside American electrical infrastructure. Then Chinese linked cyber actors targeting critical systems. Then enormous new electricity demand created by the AI build out. And now Chinese linked influence activity aimed the political argument surrounding whether America should build that infrastructure in the first place. Hardware, networks, power, public opinion. Those aren't four unrelated stories. They're four different surfaces of the same strategic competition. And that's why I think the definition of national security has, in fact, changed. National security isn't merely preventing somebody from crossing the border with a weapon. Sometimes it's knowing what communications device is sitting inside an inverter. Sometimes it's keeping an attacker from establishing persistence inside a utility network. And sometimes it's recognizing when somebody halfway around the world is pretending to be Patricia from Pennsylvania because Patricia's Facebook profile is more persuasive than the Chinese Foreign Ministry. So before we bring that argument home to Oklahoma, let me tell you about one of my newer friends around here, Nectar Sleep. You guys know how I am with this stuff. I don't like telling you to go buy something I haven't actually used myself. So I waited a few nights before I really started talking about this bed. Well, I've been sleeping on it for several nights now, and yeah, this thing is pretty darn awesome. Not even gonna lie. Mine has the adjustable base, it's got the massage feature, all the bells and whistles, and I've already discovered something potentially dangerous. I can work from bed now, and I'm not even kidding. Raise the back up, throw the laptop on a tray, and apparently I've now figured out how to do show prep while technically still lying down. So I'm not sure whether Nectar has improved my sleep or simply enabled my workaholism even further. Either way, I'm now sleeping rather comfortably. And honestly, a mattress is one of those things you don't think much about until the one you've got starts making you miserable. In my case, while we were getting everything ready for this one to arrive, I discovered my old bed was apparently getting pretty close to giving up on life completely. So the timing worked out pretty well. If you're thinking about replacing yours, I'm going to put a QR code up here in just a second while we go to the music breaks and stuff here in just a second. So scan that and at least take a look at what they've got. I tried it before. I told you about it. I like it. And at this point, that's about the strongest endorsement I know how to give you. Scan the QR code and you'll get an additional $100 off Nectar Sleep. And maybe, just maybe, you'll stop waking up angry at your mattress. Just saying. All right, we are gonna actually. I take that back. Sorry. So let me go ahead and put that QR code up. I'm sorry, I'm still working on the timing of this stuff. So anyway, but yeah. So I forgot we have an e segment before we do top of the hour. So yeah, new formats and stuffs. Anyway, all right. So live programming. Woohoo! All right. So welcome back. And because everything we've just been discussing about data centers, electricity, infrastructure costs, local opposition, and who pays for expansion, here in Oklahoma, we're already having that argument. And we're actually further into it than you might think. Data centers aren't some hypothetical thing. Oklahoma leaders hope they might show up. They hope they're going to show up, and they don't want them to show up 5 years from now. They're being proposed. Communities are fighting over them. Utilities are figuring out how to serve them. The legislature is writing rules around them, and the people are already being forced to explain what those rules ought to look like, which is probably a good thing, because after spending most of this hour talking about the national security implications of the AI build-out, the local question gets practical very quickly. And that question becomes again, who pays? Oklahoma has already passed legislation aimed at keeping massive new electricity users from simply dumping the cost of their expansion onto everybody else. The idea is pretty simple. If you're bringing in a facility that needs an enormous amount of power, existing residential customers shouldn't suddenly get handed the bill for the infrastructure required to serve you. Utilities are developing special large load arrangements. The state has created additional transparency requirements. And Oklahoma law allows major facilities like data centers to build generation behind the meter. In plain English, if you're going to use electricity like a small city, Oklahoma is increasingly saying you may need to start thinking a little more like a utility yourself. And then there's the water. Electricity gets most of the headlines, but if you follow these local fights, water isn't far behind it. That's part of what has driven opposition in places like Piedmont, where residents have been debating a proposed campus that could eventually include multiple data centers. The developer says it intends to use closed-loop cooling, essentially recycling water through the cooling system, rather than continuously drawing fresh supplies. That distinction matters. Saying data centers use water without asking what kind of cooling system they use is about as useful as saying cars use fuel without asking what kind of car we're talking about. Technology matters, the design matters, location matters, but so does trust. And when somebody walks into a community and says, don't worry, the giant industrial project won't create the problems you're worried about, people tend to respond, great, now prove it to me. That's not anti-business. That's not even anti-technology. That's local government doing what local government is supposed to do. And this issue is now sitting directly inside the governor's race. Mike Mazzei, who just won the Republican runoff this week, laid out 4 conditions with when KOCO here locally asked him about large data centers. First, no taxpayer dollars or taxpayer support. Second, they should provide their own energy so they're not driving up utility prices for everybody else. Third, use advanced closed-loop cooling systems to manage water consumption. Fourth, put them in properly developed industrial areas. And then he made the larger point. Under those conditions, he thinks data centers have an appropriate place in the AI revolution, and Oklahoma should participate in it. That is a much more useful argument than data centers good. Or data centers bad, because neither one tells us anything. The serious question is, under what conditions are they good for Oklahoma? There is clearly an upside here. It involves things like investment, constructions, increase in tax base, better infrastructure, potentially enormous amounts of capital flowing into communities that might otherwise never see it. And strategically, if artificial intelligence is going to become as important as Washington keeps telling us it will, Oklahoma has some obvious advantages. Land, energy, and a central location, a comparatively business-friendly environment, and potentially an opportunity to become part of an industry that is going to grow whether Oklahoma participates or not. But the long-term payoff is not automatic. A massive construction project can generate a lot of economic activity while it's being built. That doesn't automatically translate into thousands of permanent jobs once the servers are humming. So the utility agreement matters. The tax deal matters. And what the community gets in return matters as well. Which takes me back to where we started today. For a long time, America approached development with a pretty simple formula. Somebody wants to invest billions of dollars here? Fantastic. What do we have to give them? Maybe the better question should have always been, What do we need from them? If you want Oklahoma land, fine. If you want Oklahoma workers, great. If you want access to Oklahoma infrastructure, we got to talk. But if your business model requires enormous amounts of power, water, transmission capacity, tax incentives, and public infrastructure, then the public has every right to know exactly what it's getting back. And that connects directly to the influence operation story we were talking about before we talked about the nectar bed. If Oklahoma handles these projects badly, if people believe they're getting stuck with the bill, if utility rates spike, if agreements are hidden, if communities think developers got sweetheart deals while residents got ignored, China doesn't have to invent the resentment. We will have manufactured it ourselves. All an influence operation has to do is find that crack. That's why transparency isn't just good local government anymore. In a strange way, transparency becomes part of national resilience. If people know who's paying, if they know what the project consumes, if they know what the community gets, if elected officials can defend the agreement in daylight, then it becomes much harder for somebody 7,000 miles away to convince people that something sinister is being hidden from them. But if the deal really is hidden, well, good luck blaming the bot farm for that one. And I think that's the right place to leave this first hour. We started with a presidential declaration about foreign equipment inside America's electrical grid. We followed that into Chinese-linked cyber operations, then into the enormous power requirements of artificial intelligence, then into foreign attempts to manipulate the American political argument surrounding that infrastructure. And we end up right here back in Oklahoma again, asking the most basic questions of all. Can we build what America needs without asking ordinary Americans to blindly absorb those costs? And I think we can. But only if we stop treating national security, economic development, and energy policy and local government like they're four separate conversations, because increasingly they are not. All right, so that's going to do it for hour one. Coming up in hour two, we're staying with the foreign influence question, but we're leaving transformers and servers farms behind. Speaking of transformers, RIP Optimus Prime. Just saying. Because not every American system a foreign intelligence service might want access to has wires. Newly released FBI records are giving us a much closer look at the Bureau's investigation involving Congress critter, or former, is he former yet? Is he? I don't remember. Anyway, Congress critter Eric Swalwell and Christine Fang, otherwise known as Fang Fang. And the bigger question isn't whether we can prove Swalwell committed a crime. The documents don't establish that. The question is what the FBI knew, what it investigated, what it ultimately decided to do with what it knew, and whether those standards were applied consistently when foreign influence touched American politics. That'll be hour two. Stay with me. We'll be right back.
I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage. But the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. You can wave a flag above it. You can quote a verse or two. You can dress it up like justice till it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate. Oh, in America tonight, no room in the home. Oh, where the children need the light, no room in the heart. Oh, where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can't stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart, oh, where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start.
Oh,
Where the anger breaks.
where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up.
Oh,
Where the hurt gives way.
no room for hate.
No room for hate.
No, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
Not in Jesus' name. Oh, not in this house. Not in this heart. Not in his name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight, entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST, the future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Got a vendetta. Coffee tastes like bad decisions I ain't made yet. Boss man talking about we got her, and that means me, brother. Afraid I got a terminal case of the I don't want us. Mind checked out, heart ain't in the building. That second hand's crawling like it hates my guts. The man treating rich like it's a sin, even God took a beat. So, suck it. Thank God it's Friday, punching out loud. Hands in the air, middle finger to 9 to 5. Bill's still waiting, but tonight I don't care. Cold beer sermon and a bar stool prayer. Take this job and shove it, I quit. Till Monday. Cause tonight I'm free. Yeah, work and wait. It ain't owning me. So raise them up high. Let the whistle blow. Thank God it's Friday. That's all I know. HR in the break room sounding like a preacher, talking about culture smiles and being team players. Clipboard dreams on the fluorescent light, selling hours of my life just to make it to Friday night. Got dirt on my jeans, and grease on my hands, clock more over than quality plans. But when that bell rings, it's a holy sound. Feel like chains hit the floor when it echoes around. I ain't lazy, I just work my fill. If rest is a sin, guess I always will. Thank God it's Friday, punching out live. Hands in the air, middle finger to 9 to 5. Bill's still waiting, but tonight I don't care. Cold beer sermon and a bar stool prayer. Take this job and shove it, I quit. Till Monday. Cause tonight I'm free. Yeah, work and wait. It ain't on me. So raise them up high. Let the whistle blow. Thank God it's Friday. That's all I know. Boss can have Monday. God on Sunday. But Friday night's speaking it loud. With a mind and a mission that makes us proud. Earn this page. That's real, the Rick Robinson show, where we say what we feel.
All right. Welcome back into the program. Show clock is a little bit off, so since we've got something behind us, we're going to have to go into hurry-up mode here, but we're going to try to get through all the notes, at least through all the important stuff anyway. So welcome back. Hour 1 is in the books. Hour 2 will be underway in just a moment as soon as I remember that I didn't open up my notes for Hour 2 yet. Funny how that happens. And now it's not letting me get to the downloads. Live radio. One moment, please. knew I should have just opened them both and I didn't do it. I don't know why I didn't do it. All right, so the good news is I think I got it done before the outro, or the intro actually finished. So welcome back into the program. And so here is part 2 of Friday's The Rick Robinson Show. So before the break, we were talking about China trying to get inside American systems. Trying to get inside America's pants. Anyway, but not every system has wires. Sometimes the target is infrastructure. Sometimes it's networks. Sometimes it's public opinion. And sometimes it's people. That brings us to the newly released FBI material involving former Congress critter Eric Swallowswell and Christine Fang Fang Bang Bang. And before anybody gets out over their skis, let me put this guardrail up immediately. These documents do not establish that Eric Swalwell committed a crime yet, and that does matter. If we're going to spend an hour talking about institutional standards, we probably ought to start by having one ourselves. What the newly released FBI files do show is that they opened an investigation in 2014 involving Swalwell and Fang Fang Bang Bang. According to the documents quoted in the reporting, the stated objective included developing evidence related to possible campaign finance violations and potential quid pro quo exchanges. The files reportedly identified Fang as a Chinese national with family connections, the FBI associated with China's Ministry of State Security. They also say Swallowswell acknowledged physical relations with Bang Bang Fang Fang. From a criminal standpoint, that does not establish wrongdoing. From a counterintelligence standpoint, though, relationships, especially ones as questionable as that, they actually do matter. Because intelligence services do not always recruit people by handing them a trench coat and saying, "Congratulations, you're now a spy." Sometimes the first objective is access, proximity, relationship, knowing who talks to whom, and learning who has influence, and learning who might have influence later. According to these records, Bang Bang Fang Fang also referred interns who were placed in campaign and congressional offices. Investigators examined campaign donations they believed may have been routed through intermediaries back to her. Again, that tells us what investigators were looking at. It does not tell us they prove Swalwell knowingly participated in an illegal scheme. What we know is this: the FBI investigated, the FBI gathered evidence, the FBI gave Swalwell a defensive briefing, and eventually in February of 2017, the Bureau dropped Swalwell as a subject and narrowed the investigation to Miss Fang herself. That's where the more important question begins, not why wasn't Swalwell arrested, even though I've asked that question on this show before. That assumes an evidentiary conclusion the documents do not support at this time. The more useful question is this: what standard did the FBI use to decide that warning Swalwell and narrowing the case was the appropriate response? Because once you ask that, another comparison becomes difficult to avoid. Carter Page, Crossfire Hurricane. The Justice Department Inspector General later identified 17 significant inaccuracies and omissions across the 4 FISA applications targeting Page. The Inspector General also said it did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that the case agents intentionally committed misconduct. Both parts belong in the story. The failures were in fact serious. The Inspector General said the Bureau fell far short of the requirements that FISA applications be scrupulously accurate. But serious failure does not automatically prove corrupt intent. The question for us is something else. Why did one foreign influence concern lead to a defensive briefing, while another eventually led to surveillance? Maybe the evidence looked different internally. Maybe investigators believed warning someone would compromise an operation. Maybe there were perfectly legitimate operational reasons. But if those were the reasons, then that is exactly what institutional standards are supposed to explain. Because from outside the building, what Americans see is one political figure gets warned, another gets investigated, and they're both from opposite sides of the aisle. One suspected foreign influencer problem is treated as something the target needs protection from. Another is treated as evidence that the target may himself be compromised. Different cases can absolutely justify different outcomes, but the institution has to be able to explain the difference. And that question gets even more important when we move into what happened with information involving the Biden family. Bet you guys thought we forgot about them, huh? I kind of want to forget about them too, but they keep showing back up in the news. The FBI had possession of material from Hunter Biden's laptop before the 2020 election. According to testimony cited in the newly released material, Bureau personnel knew the laptop itself was real. That does not mean every individual item on it had already been independently authenticated. But the Bureau also remained highly sensitive to the possibility that damaging information involving Biden, Ukraine, or Burisma could be a part of a Russian influence operation. That concern was not inherently irrational. Russia had interfered to an extent in the 2016 election. Kind of like this foreign influencer campaign they're finding in China, though. It made it sound a lot worse in the headlines than what it actually was. Foreign intelligence services do use stolen, manipulated, or selectively released information to shape political debate. The danger comes when the instinct to protect against foreign disinformation becomes so broad that legitimate information gets swept into the same category. Because then the agency responsible for identifying foreign influence risks affecting how Americans perceive legitimate domestic information. And that is a dangerous line. The newly released records also contain internal FBI language that has understandably gotten a lot of attention. One official reportedly texted colleagues that she was basically running a shadow government across the FBI. Now, that's a hell of a phrase choice there, but a text message is not an organizational chart. It doesn't prove that there was literally a secret government operation inside the Bureau. What it does tell us is that at least one senior official described her own influence inside the FBI in extraordinarily expansive terms, and according to the reporting, she communicated routinely, possibly daily, with the director at the time, Christopher Wray. That deserves additional scrutiny. Not because one colorful phrase proves a conspiracy, but because institutional power is often less about who has the biggest title and who controls the flow of, and more about who controls the flow of information. Who decides what goes upstairs, what gets labeled urgent, which intelligence is considered credible and which isn't, which information gets tagged as foreign influence, who gets briefed, who gets investigated, and who decides when an investigation ends. The FBI has to make judgment calls. It cannot investigate every rumor the same way. It can't treat every allegation as equally credible. And it certainly cannot give a defensive briefing every time somebody from another country says hello. Discretion is unavoidable, which means consistency becomes essential. If two politically sensitive cases are handled very differently, the public should be able to understand why. Not with trust us, with standards, with evidence, with procedure, with a record that still makes sense after you remove the names and political parties. And this is where people often get trapped in the partisan version of the story. Republicans hear Swalwell and say, see, they protected Democrats. Democrats hear Crossfire Hurricane and say, see, Trump was surrounded by people with foreign contacts. Maybe both sides are in fact skipping the harder question. Did the institution have a consistent rule book? Because foreign influence is not just a Republican problem. It is not just a Democratic problem. China doesn't care which party your voter registration says. Russia surely doesn't care. Iran could give two craps. Any serious intelligence service is going to look for whoever offers access, leverage, information, division, or influence, or possibly some combination of all those things. So the institution charged with defending the country cannot afford standards that appear to change depending on the political name attached to the file. And that brings us to the question that is going to run through this hour. Who decides, and by what standard are those decisions made? Who decides when a foreign contact becomes a counterintelligence threat? Who gets warned? Who gets surveilled? When does questionable information become disinformation? When does an investigation end? And most importantly, can the institution explain those decisions in a way that still makes sense if you swap the political parties involved? Because if it can't even correct decisions start looking political. And once that happens, institutional trust collapses faster than the institution can rebuild it. And if standards matter inside the FBI, then they matter just as much when a federal judge decides what rules govern an election. Because when we come back, Judge Indira Talwani is back in the middle of the mail-in ballot fight. And once again, the question is not simply whether you like the outcome, it is who has the authority to decide and under what standard. And that's next when we come back right here, live on the Friday edition of the Rick Robinson Show. Next up is our law enforcement tribute. We'll be right back.
When the call comes in, somebody answers. Day or night, they're already moving. Calm voices, fast hands, doing the work while the rest of the world freezes. From a headset to a truck, from a badge to a door, they don't stop to count the cost. They step in when it matters. It's not about being seen, it's about being there. They're holding the line when the lines go dead, standing their ground when the world goes dark. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line through the fire, the flood. When everything falls, they don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. Before the sirens fade, before the scene is clear, someone's already making sense of the moment. Keeping people alive, keeping things from getting worse. Some run toward danger, some stay behind and hold it together. Different roles, same weight, same promise to show up. When everything's on the line, they're already there. They're holding the line when the lines go dead, standing their ground when the world goes dark. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line through the fire, the flood. When everything falls, they don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. This is service, this is sacrifice, this is how lives are saved. No spotlight, no applause, just showing up again and again. They're holding the line when the world goes dark. When everything's breaking, they hold their ground. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line. So we raise our voices for the ones who stand. Every voice, every badge, every helping hand. They don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. Always standing in the gap for us all. For those who run and for those who hold steady, for those who stand in the gap.
And welcome in to the second and final half of the Rick Robinson Show. Well, I guess this is the second half of the second hour. So, yeah, fourth and final half. And it's Friday, so don't forget, right after this, we will have the weekend news roundup. Looks like Slager is going to have to pass again because they keep making him actually do work over at Mediaite. So Looks like it'll be just be me, BZ, and Amy. But we'll be joining you guys as soon as I wrap up here. And we are hopefully making enough catch up because there for a minute the show clock was really, really off. So welcome back. Before the break, we were looking at how much discretion exists inside the FBI. Now take that same question and move it into the courts because Judge Indira Talwani is back. And she's back right in the middle of that mail-in ballot fight yet again. And once again, the most useful way to look at this is not, do I like the outcome? It is who has the authority to decide and under what standard. Earlier this week, the Supreme Court removed one procedural obstacle that had been blocking the Trump administration's mail voting order. But the court did not rule that the underlying policy was constitutional. For the moment, that distinction matters. The administration then moved forward with a Postal Service rule tied to the executive order. And Talwani has now stepped back in and blocked implementation yet again, this time for 2 weeks, while the new challenge proceeds. The practical problem here is timing. States are already preparing ballots. Overseas ballots are about to go out. Election officials are working against hard deadlines. And the new rule would require states to meet additional requirements involving voter lists and ballot envelope procedures before the Postal Service delivers mailed ballots. Supporters of the administration say this is about election security. Opponents say the executive branch is trying to exercise authority the Constitution gives primarily to Congress and the states, and that is the legal fight this discussion lives in. But the institutional question underneath it is much broader. How much authority can one branch exercise over an election system deliberately divided among several different actors? The president is asserting executive authority. Congress and the states have explicit constitutional roles in federal elections, and the courts are deciding whether this particular executive action crosses the line or not. That's not a simple system. It was never designed to be a simple system. And once power is divided, discretion lives in the gaps. Who decides whether a federal rule is a legitimate exercise of executive authority? Who decides whether a state has enough time to comply? Who decides whether delaying a rule protects voters or improperly blocks the president? Who decides whether changing procedures shortly before an election creates more security or more chaos? Those are the questions now sitting in Talwani's courtroom. And whatever you think of her ruling, and I've already given you my opinion more than once, remember, the Supreme Court's earlier action didn't settle the merits on this case, unfortunately. It cleared away one procedural problem. Now the underlying constitutional fight is back. Talwani has scheduled another hearing for September the 3rd, and given the timeline, there is every reason to expect this to move quickly through the appeals process. So this is not Judge Block's Trump story over, and it's not. And it's also not Supreme Court back Trump story over. The reality, as it often is much messier than that. The executive branch is asserting authority, states are challenging it, a federal judge is reviewing it, and the Supreme Court may have to weigh in yet again. That is how institutional power gets tested, not in theory, often in collision. And that's why the standard matters more than the scoreboard. If you like Talwani, you should still care what legal rule she is applying. If you dislike Talwani, you should still care whether the administration has a defensible legal basis for what it is trying to do. If the only rule becomes my side won today, then we are no longer talking about the rule of law, we're talking about scorekeeping. And the entire point of a constitutional system is that the rule is supposed to survive even when your team loses. Somebody really needs to remind the Democrats of that, because that's not really our problem, though. So now we've looked at two places where enormous discretion lives: federal law enforcement and the courts. Both involve judgment. Both involve politically explosive questions. Both require inherent public trust. And in both cases, the public has every right to ask, who decided and what rule did they use? But now, let me show you what federal power looks like when the mission is considerably less ambiguous. Sometimes the assignment is simpler than that. Find the gang, find the drugs, find the guns, make the arrests. Yesterday, the Justice Department announced federal charges against 81 alleged members of a violent drug trafficking organization in Puerto Rico known as Los Bajadeo, or LBD. According to the DOJ, the FBI, and Puerto Rico police, they led the takedown and arrested 70 defendants. The indictment alleges the organization operated for years across western Puerto Rico. Prosecutors say it distributed heroin, fentanyl, crack cocaine, powdered cocaine, otherwise known as snow, just kidding, marijuana, and illegal firearms. And the alleged operation reached into multiple public housing projects and surrounding neighborhoods. DOJ says members used radios, cell phones, messaging apps, and social media to coordinate. And when the organization believed it was threatened, prosecutors alleged members used violence, including shootings, kidnappings, and murders, to protect their overall operation. 21 defendants also face firearms charges tied to drug trafficking. And prosecutors are seeking forfeiture tied to alleged proceeds valued at more than $49.7 million. Can I just have a little slice of that pie? Just the 0.7. I'm not greedy. Just give me the 0.7. I'm good with that. Sorry. DOJ describes the organization as having the familiar structure of a large trafficking operation. Leaders, suppliers, enforcers, runners, and sellers, along with lookouts, facilitators, and just like every criminal case, these are all allegations. An indictment is not a conviction. Every defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Those standards matter too. We have to say them anymore pretty much on every time we bring up this kind of stuff, because otherwise there will be a lawyer sending a letter to my mailbox that says, hey, guess what you just did, bastards. But compare the institutional problem here with what we were just discussing. Nobody's confused about whether a large alleged fentanyl trafficking conspiracy involving firearms and violence is the kind of conduct federal law enforcement is supposed to investigate. The public, for the most part, understands the job. And I do have to put one qualifier in that previous sentence. Nobody that believes in the rule of law still doesn't understand the assignment. The left, I think we could probably make a case that they may not care anymore. Anyway, so find the people allegedly poisoning communities, unless you're of the left. Build the case, unless you're of the left. Make the arrest, unless you're of the left, and then you prove it in court, unless you're of the left. That does not make federal law enforcement infallible. It does not mean mistakes cannot happen. It doesn't mean defendants don't lose their rights, because they often do, especially while incarcerated. It means the mission is easier for the public to understand. At least unless they're damaged. And that is the contrast, because sometimes people hear criticism of the FBI, DOJ, or other courts and assume the argument is government power itself is bad. Not really, but I do think our government still has way too much power. Government power, as much as I want it to be limited, in some cases is necessary. You want a government capable of dismantling a violent fentanyl network. You want investigators capable of following the money. Show me the money. Oh, wait, sorry. You want prosecutors capable of building cases. You want courts capable of deciding whether the government actually proved what it alleged. The problem is not the power here. The problem is power without a clear, consistently applied standard. That is where trust breaks down. When a gang indictment says, here are the defendants, here are the charges, here is the alleged conspiracy, here are the drugs, here are the weapons, here is what prosecutors say they intend to prove. People can understand what the government says it's doing. But when politically sensitive cases are handled differently, when election rules move through overlapping executive orders, agencies, regulations, state procedures, and injunctions, when Americans cannot tell why one foreign influence case produced a warning and another produced surveillance, that's when institutions have to work harder to explain themselves. Because discretion creates responsibility. And the more discretion an institution has, the more transparent its standards always need to be. And I do say always. Which brings us back to the question running through this hour. Who decides? And what standards did they use in that decision? We asked it about the FBI. We've asked it so far about the courts. And now we've seen what things look like when the public can more easily understand the mission. So, after this brief break, Oklahoma voters just made some decisions of their own, including one that gets directly into the question we were talking about in hour one. When government uses economic development policy, who decides and who pays? But first, let me tell you again about one of my newer friends around here, and that is Nectar Sleep. You guys know how I am with this stuff. I don't like telling you to go buy something I haven't actually used myself. So I've waited a few nights before I really started talking about this bed. Well, I've been sleeping on it for several nights now, and yeah, this thing is pretty darn awesome. Mine has all of the bells and whistles. It's got the adjustable base, the massage feature, and I've already discovered something potentially dangerous for yours truly, because I can now work from bed. Not kidding. Raise the back up, throw the laptop on a tray, and apparently I've now figured out how to do show prep and or story prep while technically laying down. So at this point, I'm not sure whether Nectar has improved my sleep or simply enabled my workaholism even further. Either way, I'm sleeping rather comfortably. And honestly, a mattress is one of those things you don't think much about until the one you've got starts making you miserable. In my case, while we were getting everything ready for this one to arrive, I discovered my old bed was apparently getting pretty close to giving up on life completely. So the timing worked out pretty well. If you're thinking about replacing yours, I'm about to put a QR code up, if it's not up already, for Nectar Sleep. You can scan that, see what they offer, and if you like what they've got, that code that's in that QR code gives you an extra $100 off of an already pretty amazing deal. I tried it before I told you about it. I like it. And at this point, that's about the strongest endorsement I know how to give you. Again, scan the QR code that I'm about to put up if it's not off already, and you'll get an additional $100 off. Nectar Sleep. And maybe, just maybe, you'll stop waking up angry at your mattress. Just saying.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
All right, so welcome back into the program. Welcome back. Final segment. We got, about 18 minutes till we roll into the Weekend News Roundup. Again, it'll be me, BZ, and Amy Curtis. And hope you guys will join us for that. Let me see. Yeah, we do have the right QR code up. I wasn't sure if it was there or not, but I don't guess I ever changed it out. So anyway, if you'd like to check things out at Nectar Sleep, just scan that QR code. And like I said, if nothing else, just check it out. Look, one thing I didn't put I'm still working on some of these live read scripts. One of the things I didn't put in there is they do have a 365 night, you try it, you don't like it, send it back guarantee on the mattress. So maybe we're checking out just for that alone. Just saying. All right. So final bit here, and we're going to go back locally for that. So again, welcome back. We've spent this hour asking a pretty basic question. Who decides and by what standard? Again, we asked it about the FBI. We asked it about the courts. We looked at what federal power looks like when the mission is easier to understand. And now we bring that question back home here to Oklahoma, because voters here just made a few decisions of their own. One of them was obviously the Republican runoff for governor. Mike Mazzei beat Gettner Drummond by only about 2,000 votes out of more than 371,000 Republican ballots cast. That works out to roughly 29% of registered Republicans, a notable increase over the last comparable gubernatorial runoff in 2018. So yes, that race was close. But I don't want to spend the end of today's show rehashing a horse race we already covered, because we did cover it pretty extensively on Wednesday. Because another vote on Tuesday may tell us something just as interesting. State question 844 got absolutely crushed. It wasn't narrowly rejected. It wasn't edged out. Voters rejected it by about 74%. And what 844 was trying to change gets directly into the argument we were having in hour one about development incentives and who ultimately absorbs the cost. Oklahoma has a manufacturing tax incentive program dating back to 1985. New qualifying manufacturers can receive a 5-year property tax exemption. In those cases, most local governments and school districts still depend on that property tax revenue. So under the current system, the state reimburses them for what they lose. If a qualifying manufacturer comes into a county and gets the exemption, the school district isn't simply supposed to shrug and say, well, I guess we're poor for 5 years. The state makes up that lost revenue. The problem is that the reimbursement program has become expensive. The dedicated fund has repeatedly fallen short. In fiscal year 2025 alone, lawmakers had to add $64.8 million in supplemental appropriation just to cover the repayments to the schools. So lawmakers put State Question 844 before voters. What would it have done, you may ask? It would have amended the state constitution to give the legislature more flexibility to reimburse local governments and school districts at less than 100% of the property tax revenue lost through those manufacturing exemptions, supporters essentially said this program is getting too expensive. The costs are concentrated. A relatively small number of counties benefit heavily. The legislature needs more flexibility. That in and of itself isn't necessarily an irrational argument. If a state incentive program keeps getting more expensive, lawmakers absolutely should ask whether the structure still makes sense. Opponents had a different response, however. Why are you fixing an economic development incentive by taking money away from the local governments and school districts that had no control over granting the exemptions in the first place? And that's where this gets interesting. Even House Speaker Kyle Hilbert, who supported putting the question before voters, acknowledged afterward that opponents had made a strong argument that lawmakers should instead examine who qualifies for the incentive on the front end rather than reducing reimbursements after companies have already qualified. That is a pretty important distinction because there are really two questions. Question one, should this company get the tax break? Question two, once we give it the tax break, who absorbs the lost revenue? State question 844 was largely aimed at question two, and Oklahoma voters appear to have answered. Don't solve question one by making the school districts eat question two. Now, that's my interpretation of the political signal. The ballot did not ask voters to explain why they voted no. Some may have disliked changing the Constitution. Others may have opposed the reimbursement change itself. Others may simply have thought the proposal was too complicated, because it was. We cannot pretend 74% of voters walked into the booth with identical reasoning, but a 74% rejection is not noise. And state question 844 gives us a strong signal that voters were not comfortable giving the legislature more flexibility to reduce reimbursements tied to those development incentives. That becomes especially interesting when you put it beside the data center argument from hour one. Remember the question: if a massive new development project needs extraordinary amounts of electricity, transmission, water, tax incentives, and public infrastructure, who ultimately pays? Now look at state question 844. A manufacturer gets a property tax exemption. Local governments lose revenue. The state promises reimbursement. The reimbursement becomes expensive, and eventually somebody says, maybe we shouldn't reimburse all of it. And the voters say, no, absolutely not. Different program, different development, same underlying political question. Who gets the benefit? Who gets shafted? And who gets to decide whether the trade was worth it after all? That is why Tuesday's results are more interesting than simply Mazie won. As a matter of fact, the gubernatorial race was probably one of the most boring things in Oklahoma politics currently because, as we have been discussing, the Democratic Party, unfortunately, is not what it used to be here. There was a long-time joke that Democrats in Oklahoma would be Republicans anywhere else. From what I've seen from some of the candidates that are making some really weird social media rounds, that's not necessarily true anymore. But Mazie, who did win, tells us who Republicans nominated. State question 844 tells us voters were unwilling to give lawmakers more room to reduce local reimbursements tied to those incentives. There's another important thing buried in all of this. Economic development incentives sound free when politicians announce them, but they're not. Free to you doesn't necessarily mean free. A tax exemption still carries a cost. Maybe it's a worthwhile one, maybe it's not. Maybe attracting the company produces more economic activity than the government gives up. But what happens if it doesn't? Maybe the project brings jobs, suppliers, infrastructure, and long-term tax growth. And that can absolutely happen. But what if it doesn't? But there's always a ledger somewhere. Somebody gives up revenue. Somebody builds infrastructure. Somebody takes on the risks. And if elected officials can't explain who bears those costs and why the deal is worth it, eventually voters are going to ask the question for them. Which brings us all the way back around to the theme of this hour. Who decides and by what standard? Inside the FBI, that question determines who gets investigated and who gets warned instead. Inside the courts, it determines where one branch's authority ends and another begins. Inside law enforcement, clearer standards make the mission easier for the public to understand, even if half of the public hates it. And in Oklahoma, economic development policy, voters just reminded the legislature of something very important. Sometimes the people themselves decide the standard. You can offer the incentive. You can design the reimbursement formula. You can put the constitutional amendment on the ballot, but eventually they get to say either yes or no. And Tuesday on State Question 844, Oklahoma voters did exactly that by a lot, and they resoundingly said no. And maybe that's the line that ties together all of today's show better than anything else. We started the show talking about systems, the electrical grid, cyber networks, artificial intelligence, data centers, foreign influence. Then we moved into institutions, the FBI, the courts, federal law enforcement, and finally the voters. Different systems, different kinds of power, but the same basic problem. Power needs rules, it needs standards, it needs transparency. And the people affected by those decisions need to understand why the decision was made in the first place. Because whether we're talking about a transformer built overseas, a foreign intelligence contact, an election rule, a federal indictment, or an economic development incentive, the fastest way to destroy trust is to tell people, don't worry about how we get here, just trust us. That doesn't work anymore. Not ever since Nancy Pelosi's line of we got to pass it, I know what's in it. And frankly, it shouldn't work. Anyway, I'm Rick Robinson. That's going to do it for this one. We'll be back in about 7 minutes or so with the Weekend News Roundup live right here on KLRnradio.com. I will not be back after that one. Aggie's off tonight, so I'm taking Friday night off. Technically not really taking it off. Just going to write some, but no radio for tonight. But do make sure you come back for Curse of Stephanos tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern after we finish the Weekend News Roundup. Don't go away too far. There will be a brief pause while I get things reset and set everything back up again. But anyway, have a great Friday. Have a safe weekend. And as for this one, I'll be back doing this one on Monday afternoon at noon my time, 1 in the East and 10 a.m. in the West. And again, hang out for the Weekend News Roundup coming up in about 5 minutes right here live on KLR Radio. I'm Rick Robinson. This has been my show, and it is finally Friday. Bye, everybody.